We are starting first session on driving decarbonization through carbon markets. May pleasure to invite chair and moderator for this session, Mr. Rahul Tongia. He is a senior fellow at CSEP. Welcome, sir. May I also invite panelists for this session, starting with Mr. Nithyanandam Yuvaraj Dinesh Babu. He is a Executive Director at Climate Action Data Trust. Welcome, sir. Okay. Okay, sir. May I invite Mr. Rambabu Paravastu. He is a Chief Sustainability Officer at Greenko. He will be joining with us shortly. May I invite Mr. Manpreet Singh. He is a partner ESG strategy and transformation at PwC. Welcome, sir. May I invite Snigdha Verma. She is a head carbon credit at Convergence Energy Services Limited. Welcome, ma'am. May I invite Mr. Indranil Chatterjee. He is a SVP International Carbon Exchange. Welcome, sir. May I invite Mr. Ashok Kumar. He is regional representative for Central and South Asia at Verma. Welcome, sir. May I invite Mr. Rohit Kumar. He is a Secretary General at Carbon Markets Association of India. Welcome, sir. Handing over the session to Mr. Rahul Tongia, Dr. Rahul Tongia, to take the session forward.
Morning. Yes, today's traffic was very bad, which makes us remember dynamics, which is partly what markets are about. So it's my pleasure to, well, unfortunately, I have a schizophrenia problem because I'm chair and moderator. So what that means is the chair would like long, detailed discussions and richness, and the moderator is also to keep the time. So we'll see what this balancing act looks like. We have a very distinguished and diverse group of stakeholders because carbon markets are relatively new in India. In fact, they don't quite exist in what we think of typically from the power sector, what a mature market looks like. And there's not only things that will be evolving, but we also have multiple objective functions that need a lot of stakeholders. I mean, you can set rules top down. Question is, how does that impact discoms? How does that impact citizens? Because that's ultimately what one of the objectives of these policies are. So I'll just share a few thoughts that can really get us going, because unfortunately, there is a bit of the elephant and the five blind men in this space. Because typically, there are experts and policies that do one aspect of decarbonization. I mean, let's remember that the carbon market is a means to an end. It is a tool for decarbonization, which is one of the objective functions. And even decarbonization is only a subset of our broader energy policy, development strategy, all of the above. So climate change has been called by leading scholars, including Nick Stern and others, as the world's biggest or greatest market failure. Pollution is just one of these, and CO2 has been invisible, relatively speaking, and it has had problems. So there is a lot of regulation towards climate change already there without a carbon market in India and around the world. Now, one observation is markets deal with efficiency. That's the whole premise of a market. But I want to first just highlight that equity, social equity, is not the same as efficiency. So anytime there are trade-offs is something that I do hope our panelists can just allude to as well. A carbon market is one form of two typical means of carbon pricing. So the broader scope has typically been, here's a pollutant, I should set a price on this externality, and if you're using a Pigouvian tax, which is you tax anything negative, equal to its damages that are not internalized. So pollution, there has been, some of the first tradable markets in the world were sulfur markets in the US with the Clean Air Act. Then of course you've now had many other markets, including India's largest, which has been the PAT scheme with e-certs. So there are lots of modes of regulation. Number of the folks here are likely to be power sector or energy sector related. And so one of the first questions, from our title, they've changed the slide, sorry, is really, you talk of power markets and carbon markets. Before we can understand how both of these come together, we want to understand what each of them is. So I will not spend time on what is a power market, but just observe that in India, power markets are relatively small. They handle only about 5.5% of electricity. The exchanges handle more, but a lot of that is not for markets. But there's a lot of other modes of regulation. So we have an RPO. We have many other instruments, e-certs, we have RECs, which are all part of, in some ways, decarbonization. So one of the open questions to our audience is, let's assume, to our panelists, but also discussion there. Let's assume we come up and achieve a reasonable carbon price. Reasonable is this balancing act, high enough to cause change, but manageable and affordable. Then does that mean we have to stop the other regulations because they could be conflicting or doubling? Power markets are real time. Carbon markets are almost the other end of the scale. Typically their issuances are annual, but they also are multi-year in their lifespan. Towards the end, we'll have a special intervention. There's no chair. We'll call you in 5 minutes. No problem. Sorry about that. So, if we talk about carbon markets in India, there are two dimensions that are really important. The first is coverage. Are we covering all the sectors in the power sector? Now, first caveat, and I'm sure the panelists know more than I do, what is the Indian market going to look like? Because it's nascent, hasn't really formulated. So, as of now, per reports, the power sector is not part of the coverage, which is a big chunk of our emissions. It's going to start with typically industry, and it's going to be more aligned with the early aspects of, for example, the ETS and CBAM, which is European's Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism tariff. The other aspect is, if you penalize carbon, create a price towards it, and then create offsets, for example, tradable credits, the quality is something that is very important and we'll hear about. But more than quality, there is also the need for additionality and permanence. If someone does a biomass-based carbon offset, well, what happens when there's a forest fire, which is more likely with climate change? Poof. And that is actually not well accounted for even in the UNFCCC, because biomass does not flow into the national accounting, it's put as an appendix item. Lots of details are missing. And the last point I want to make before we get into this discussion, 2 points. One, we want to be aware that there is a risk of greenwashing if we don't get it right. So how we set up our carbon markets is very critical. How many of you have seen or thought of, I'll ignore on the airport when you come, Indian Oil will have a sign that says 100% carbon neutral by 30 or 50 or some day. And then there's a small fine print that says for operations. Now, an oil and gas company has offered for sale a carbon neutral LNG tanker. How many of you have heard of this? So, what does it mean for a fossil fuel tanker to be carbon neutral? It doesn't mean they've sucked out the carbon and left only the hydrogen. They're offsetting it here without a market by saying, I'm going to build a solar panel in Africa and help a mangrove afforestation and say that that offsets mine. So this accounting issue is a very critical one, because in my view, just as an example for this case, that solar panel would have been built anyways, because solar is now business as usual in the power sector. It's not additive. So these are the things that we have to learn, evolve, and tighten as we go forward. There are two types of markets with this opening. There are what are called compliance markets or national mandatory markets like the EU ETS, and then there are voluntary markets which go more towards entities as opposed to at a national level. And so this is what the Googles and Microsofts of the world used to do, which is, I want to be greener. How do I do it? I'll buy or I'll pay into somebody else doing the effort. And these have had some ups and downs, and we'll hear more about this aspect from our panelists. So I'll first invite Mr. Dinesh Babu to give the, if we could load the slide, share a sort of keynote address. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rahul, for your moderating and opening remarks. I think that definitely gives a very good background in terms of how the session is going to evolve. And I would also like to formally thank ISGF for inviting me for this panel. Definitely we would have expected more audience to get into a more enriched discussion. I believe we will get more as we speak.
One of the challenges in a conference is there are parallel sessions.
Of course, yeah.
And I think cloning technology is not yet ready.
Yeah, so I believe we'll get more attention as we move forward. So I'll try to give a quick snapshot in terms of where the international carbon market, the Indian carbon market, and also as Dr. Rahul was talking about the transparency, the quality aspects in very quick manner. I won't take too much of time. In terms of the Indian international carbon market, I have ironically taken this slide from an Indian presentation by Bureau of Energy Efficiency. So it's a very familiar slide for the people who are working in the carbon market, but this sets the whole scenario in terms of how the carbon pricing, as Dr. Rahul was mentioning. There's no single market. Basically, there are different asset classes across the world that are being developed, designed, deployed, and traded. And therefore, you will see a classic difference, at least on two aspects, that there is a compliance market and there is a voluntary market. So I think that is the fundamental understanding which we are talking about. And the panelists who are sitting here have extensive experience in both these markets, including me actually. And this is as old as, like, I would say 17 to 20 years. The carbon market have been evolved in different shapes and size. A lot of good, bad, and ugly stories. And we have also overcome many challenges in the negotiations across 28 conference of parties so far, the last being so disappointing for the carbon market. But many aspects have shown a lot of confidence in terms of how the market is evolving, how the private sector, the public-private partnership is further strengthening, and how the causes are being so open, and the transparency and the quality becoming a fundamental requirement for further success of the carbon market. So there are too many moving parts as we speak in the carbon market, but I'm not trying to complicate the opening presentation by saying that carbon market is full of complex situations, but we have had tons and tons of experience, if not billion tons of carbon credits already in the market, but more the carbon credits, more the visibility, and therefore more the controversy as well. So from that angle, the panelists who are here, and also many players in this part of the world, are working very hard towards creating the much needed trust, transparency, and the ensuring the confidence in the market, including the exchange that we have representation in today's panel. So if you see here, you will see differentiation in terms of how the compliance market is evolving in different countries, how they embrace cap and trade or the intensity-based emissions trading scheme, and also in terms of how they recognize the voluntary credits coming into the compliance scheme as well. There was a biggest kind of a operating emissions trading scheme in the EU, which also allowed carbon credits from various countries to be a part of their compliance regime, and they stopped after a lot of controversies, as I mentioned to you before. And now again they are discussing reintroducing in a different angle. And India has again started this, and the discussions are still open in terms of whether the compliance scheme will allow external or the voluntary credits into the scheme. So that's a kind of a quick view in terms of how the market is divided. There are so many assets to confuse you in terms of how it is being traded, how it is being respected, how it is being basically recognized in terms of the value. So therefore, the seller of carbon credits always looks for the maximum price, but there is a market which always tries to squeeze you for the lowest price, and in between, many players like us try to see what is optimization looks like. So definitions are there, but the reality is completely different in terms of how you monetize your carbon credits. In terms of global pricing instruments, it's not that it is happening in only one part of the world. Across the world, there are so many pricing instruments that have been introduced in the carbon space. Many countries have started as early as 20 years ago. Many countries have just started yesterday, as early as yesterday. So there are so many variations in terms of the pricing instruments that are being transacted in the market and implemented by the government, and therefore you see how the countries are covering the emissions, largely starting from the power sector and then moving towards the rest of the energy or the emission intensive sectors. And therefore it gives a very good access to compare how these carbon trading schemes are going across the world. It is very difficult to say you'll achieve a universal carbon price, but having said that, at least you'll have a universal understanding of how the carbon trading could achieve the intent of becoming net zero, as again Dr. Rahul said, moving towards 2050, 2060 and 2070 by various countries, including India being the 2070 target. In terms of the prices, if anybody wants to know how the price works, as I mentioned to you, there is no universal carbon price, and the emissions trading scheme of EU hit the highest price. It crossed, kind of briefly touched 100 and crossed and then came down. But very recently it has gone down by 40 to 50% as well. So there is always this movement of price of the carbon instruments, and there, as I mentioned, there are many different carbon assets, so don't compare a European Union allowance with the Indian carbon credit. It's not a good comparison at all. So therefore the comparison becomes a bit more local, and again, as Dr. Rahul said, the societal aspect of it, the environmental attribution of it defines more the price of the carbon credits which comes from projects as compared to the carbon credits which are supposed to come from the compliance schemes. They're completely two different instruments. In terms of the revenues, therefore, it has become an excellent tool, especially for those countries who have introduced a carbon tax, because it's a direct revenue. There is no speculation in terms of who's going to pay, who's not going to pay. If they don't pay, the revenue is more because there is a penalty. So therefore, the revenues are also being considered as one of the incentives for the governments to fast track implementation of the carbon pricing instruments in the respective countries as well. So from that angle, we move from compliance to the voluntary, and the voluntary, as the name says, I personally don't subscribe to this terminology called voluntary. We always say verified or independent carbon markets, but the world goes by voluntary carbon markets, so I'm forced to use this terminology. But in terms of how you see this market, the independent carbon market has evolved. It has been you can call it as a stopgap arrangement, which happened when the earlier clean development mechanism market crashed in 2008 or 2009, and then emerged the voluntary carbon market, which largely took the best practices from the clean development mechanism market. So India and China, even today, have close to 800 projects eligible under the new Paris Agreement regime as we speak. But the previous era, there were close to around 10,000 projects across the world, India and China being the leaders in the clean development mechanism project. But having said that, today the voluntary carbon market volumes are growing very fast, and we are talking about more than billions of carbon credits coming up in the market. and there is a differential pricing. It starts as low as free to 25 tons, $25 per ton. And we also in a light moment, we say somebody is ready, willing to sell you the VERs and give you money as well. So the kind of flooding of the carbon credits is happening in a big way. But having said that, as I told you, the kind of strict understanding of the quality, transparency and the high environmental integrity has put a different onus on the market to correct itself on the voluntary side, and more interplay is being anticipated between compliance and the voluntary market. In terms of the demand, as I mentioned to you, we are moving to billions of carbon credits in the voluntary market, and the added value or the kind of the best part of voluntary is yet to come, when it is going to have a strong recognition from the corresponding adjustments that will happen when a country itself is acknowledging the sale of the carbon credits in the voluntary space into the international regimes, and therefore it would adjust its own commitment to UNFCCC, and therefore you may see a different level of pricing, level of recognition, level of respect coming for the voluntary carbon market as well. So this is the price for different segment of the voluntary carbon market. Again, I'm not subscribing or recommending or asking you to quote this anywhere, but this is just a market reference, market summary, where you will see the kind of importance that the nature-based solutions are getting these days as compared to the rest of the market. And as again Dr. Rahul said, many of the renewable energy projects are business as usual these days, so there is no clear additionality being proven for certain segment in certain countries, not across the world, and therefore you see the bottom price for the renewable energy sector in terms of the carbon market. So there are different reasons why these prices have evolved like this, and how it is going to be seen in the future. Your guess is as good as mine. But having said that, the kind of structuring has got more maturity as compared to 10 or 20 years ago.
So if it's all right, we'll just also interact. I mean, so here what you did show was there are a lot of different prices by sector or by instrument. So at one way, the sectors are different, the instruments are different, but at another dimension, do we have or expect to continue this decoupling or this segregation? Because economists would sort of say, set one price, make it, I mean, their theoretical aspiration is one fixed price worldwide for every darn molecule of GHG. Obviously, that's not going to happen anytime soon, but any thoughts towards what it means for India?
Yeah, as I mentioned, the structuring becomes extremely important. First structure is compliance versus voluntary. Second is, as you said, additional versus business as usual. Third comes the introduction of technologies which is not being introduced in the respective country. And fourth is basically how the compliance the regime is going to interact with the voluntary market. So there are so many parameterization on one hand, and the other hand you are talking about the true cost of mitigation, the true societal and the environmental attribution of such 1 ton of emission reductions. So there are many more parameters that interplay happens, and therefore you see that the cost or the price is not going to really be a predictable one, and therefore no entity in the world is going to really give you a transparent view of the pricing on a real-time basis. So it is always going to be the price that has happened before that is going to be posted to you as compared to what the live prices for certain type of projects are going to be made available to you as we speak. So that price transparency, largely exchanges have to play a crucial role, but exchanges hardly play a role in carbon credits largely so far because of the bilateral transactions. Almost close to 90 to 95% happens between two parties, and therefore the exchange has so far played a very limited role in showcasing the price transparency and the demand.
Sorry. Sure. Was there a clarification question? Yes. So to keep it more interactive, emergency, we'll hold off on questions, but we have a special, yeah. You heard it?
Yeah, my question here is that once you're saying that the voluntary market is expanding a lot, now the projects which are getting registered in India, all the carbon offsets or the credits which will get issued in India, are they allowed to be sold internationally to the other countries as of now, as the NDC target has come?
Yeah, so that's what I said. One aspect is that the previous clean development mechanism and today's voluntary carbon markets, they have huge volume of carbon credits already issued by various standards and registries for India. And right now when India is introducing its own internal compliance carbon trading scheme and the domestic trading scheme, there is absolutely no kind of indication that these could be traded elsewhere.
The minister has made a statement towards that effect.
Yeah, and he retracted that also after that.
Yeah.
So therefore, the kind of interplay between the voluntary carbon market and the international carbon market depends on various factors that, as we speak, India is trying to decipher. And therefore, we have to see how that interplays with the NDC. I use the word lot of interplay quite many times because that is where the NDC commitment comes into a greater view. And therefore, it will be extremely difficult to say today like how India's position will be in terms of allowing the past voluntary carbon market credits to be correspondingly adjusted, because it's in millions of carbon credits. They will take a position. But if they don't do it, what happens? Nothing happens. Buyers will still buy, as I said, free to $25. So the market is so open, and therefore nobody bothers today. But when the buyers start asking questions and they want to be more responsible than today, and they would like to go for certain types of credits, then you will see these questions emerging that, hey, can I get corresponding adjustment from your government? So will India allow it? So then India has to do a math in terms of that. So whether they will allow the carbon credits in the CDM like that, I doubt, because that could be a different scheme for adjusting it based on the first NDC period which is allowed. So there are a lot of dynamics here. So I can't give you a straightforward answer, unfortunately, but maybe a government official here would have done it better than me. Yes, I'll move fast. I'll take just only a few minutes. Just introducing the Paris Agreement, which is the next level of the clean development mechanism moving from Kyoto Protocol. There are two approaches, 6.2 and 6.4. 6.4 is similar to clean development mechanism called sustainable development mechanism. Don't think that the name has changed. A lot of things have changed in terms of how tight the credits would be. And in terms of 6.2, the first time any developing country can partner with a developed country to actually do a transaction on the carbon credits. So that's the aspect. And in terms of this confusing graph is to show that how many developed countries are partnering with developing countries to operationalize the 6.2 in terms of the carbon credits. And this is a famous slide, at least for me, the most favorite slide, how the market is going to get more complicated in terms of the interplay between the voluntary carbon market and the Article 6. And I'm not going to explain it fully, but you would see the way the supply and the demand is going to be in different angles and different levels. And the same credit can be used in different markets, or the different markets can use only one credits. So it's also going to be a lot of interesting in terms of structuring, raising investments. That is the key aspect end of the day. So Indian carbon market, I think quickly, most of you know this, but for those who don't know, it has a very robust institutional framework and a lot of mechanisms that are being kind of mooted. Compliance and offset already notifications are out. The left bottom that you see, the fungibility is still being discussed, not yet decided. And the regulatory, as I mentioned, already India has seen 2 notifications, June last year and December last year. And we have to see how this evolves in terms of the questions asked, like how the credits are going to be recognized in the international carbon market. Then the last point, which Dr. Rahul mentioned about the transparency initiatives. There are 2 major ones. Please take some time to go through these 2 initiatives. Left is on the supply side and the right is on the demand side. This is to ensure the transparency, increase the trust, and increase the confidence in the carbon market. And towards that, my entity, which is a not-for-profit, established by Government of Singapore, is trying to address how the trust aspect could be addressed by linking all the national carbon registries and the independent registries in one platform. And we are using blockchain as the technology to leverage this integration of the all the standards across the world. So this is a Government of Singapore owned company supported by World Bank and IETA. And this aims to basically connect all the registries across the world, as I mentioned to you, serve as a metadata layer and help the service layer and the transaction layer alike, so that you need not go to different websites to understand the carbon market movements. Rather, you can come to our blockchain platform and then get all the data at one place. So we have a strong governance model as such. Many countries and standards are involved, including Verma, who's in the panel today. And we try to connect with the governments, independent standards, and the UN. And we help all the stakeholders who are basically looking for such data. Today, they visit each and every website, manually scrape the data and do their analysis. And we have created a data dashboard as well, where you could right now see 6 registries, including the CDM, is connected through the blockchain. And so far, we have been able to showcase 17,000 projects on these registries and close to 600,000 visitors so far since we launched in December. So this is my last slide to show that how the ecosystem is moving towards the digitization. So all the projects development from the left-hand side of the slide to the right-hand side, you will see the entire digitization is going to play a big role in terms of helping the community to get even the benefits each time the credits are being sold to that level, and to the level of how you can bring down the cost of the monitoring, reporting and verification, and therefore give the enabling aspect to scale the investments and reduce more greenhouse gas emission reductions. So that's a kind of a, okay. Sorry if I took more time, but I thought I'll kind of set the scene for all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I also appreciate your flexibility in the mode, because we do want to keep it interactive. But this was a very nice overview, and it also highlighted a key facets of India vis-a-vis the world. Like you said, you use the word interplay, I think, a lot. I call these things dimensions that have to interplay. So thank you very much. I will now turn to Manpreet Singh, PwC. PwC is one of the key partners for Bureau of Energy Efficiency, I believe. And so if you could share, and we don't unfortunately have someone directly from BWE able to join us today. There was a last minute issue. So maybe you could also tell us, A, what you're able to tell us. I'm sure there's more behind the scenes that you cannot share publicly. But really to help us understand. So if there are N number of choices as we do a market design, what is it that India's been thinking about? And what does that mean, or why? So some opening remarks, please.
Sure. Thank you, Rahul. And I mean, like you said, I will have to balance out my statements. I can't give in everything here, but you know, from the perspective of, like you said, what's the thought process? It's been both ways, right? So we are looking at a compliance mechanism to start with, as well as we are making sure that the voluntary participants can also you know, make use of the carbon market as well. So one layer is, you know, how do we obligate those entities which have higher carbon intensities, and they should come under a cap and trade regime, which is something similar to the PAT scheme that you know, has been introduced. And again, the targets would be given at an industry unit level, and these units which have been pre-decided to get these targets will you know, will start getting these forecasts for the next 3 years, where they will get visibility on what is going to be their target or the expectation for them to be under what kind of a specific carbon intensity target.
So can I just clarify what you just said? Intensity target. So it is not an absolute cap.
Yeah.
And I think that's a very key thing for everyone to understand. If you look at the EU ETS, there is an actual total emissions cap. But obviously, since India is a growing economy with uncertainty on volumetric side, this is a appropriate mechanism that has been chosen, but this has implications, especially when we come back to the power sector, which we'll also do so. Thank you.
Right, right. No, so the intensities therefore become important, and what's been the thought process is to have a sectoral view initially, to look at, you know, how do you benchmark a particular sector in India, then go into, you know, an individual unit level data to look at, you know, what should be the intensity target of this particular entity, given that you have a sectoral understanding of how the sector in general, you know, is expected to reduce in alignment to the NDCs as well. So that's been the thought process of how they're looking at setting up these targets. Of course, initial flexibility has been built in, you know, to also understand and sort of get a view around how the prices will evolve. So obviously there are discussions going on you know, whether there is a need to set some sort of a price, or should it be left to the market to explore, you know, what prices come in. Of course, there has been experience of you know, the PAT scheme where the e-certs have been traded, you know, in the recent past. The involvement of exchanges, for example, also will play a role, you know, in terms of structuring and clearly defining the way in which the trading will happen in the future. And I think as we speak, there is a meeting going on where you know, they're also discussing about how does the liabilities get set in into the carbon market as well. So what would be the cost for non-compliance, for example, and the linkage that the carbon market has with the Environmental Protection Act and the environmental damages which already are defined under the EPA are also being considered in some ways to look at whether MOEF which obviously owns the EPA should really have a role in defining what sort of liabilities would be applicable to these industries. So it's not just BE, it's also being decided by the MOEF, but there is obviously a national steering committee which has met several times. I think they're meeting today as well as I speak, and that's probably going to be the last meeting before which a lot of things will come out in the public domain on what would be the actual form and size that you'll see of the market. Of course, there is a voluntary voluntary part that has been built in the market as well. So the non-obligated entities can also register projects like they have been in the voluntary markets in the past. Obviously, there was a question around what would India allow, and how would they look at those credits that have already been generated. Again, I mean, like you said, there were some thoughts that have been at the government level, whether to allow or not allow. Again, decision hasn't been made on that as yet. But the companies, we obviously don't just work with the BE, but we also work with companies at large, and there also the thought process has been now to look at again, can we develop projects which will get qualified under the voluntary carbon market. So we are seeing a lot of movement companies now again as they especially those that benefited from CDM or voluntary carbon markets in the past are expecting that they could play a key role in terms of the voluntary carbon market that is going to come up in India as well. And the likes of the large PSUs, for example, I've been speaking to many of them, have already evolved a strategy to look at what kind of projects would come under compliance, and how would they also have the opportunity monetized from the perspective of getting carbon credits generated from some of the initiatives that they will end up taking. Obviously, there is still some confusion since the mechanism or modalities haven't been finalized as yet. But I think there are thoughts at every level. And to your question, we are looking at experiences and learnings from international carbon markets as well. So be it EU ETS or China or Korea, I think we're considering learnings from everywhere, as we finalize the modalities of the Indian carbon market.
Thank you. If I could now request, actually an aside, since Rambabu, you've joined us, welcome. Should you switch your nameplates so that from the audience perspective, they'll be able to, yeah. Thank you. If I could now change the order of what we hear, because we've been hearing a lot about the national market, and everyone associates Indian carbon market as the compliance market. Maybe I could request Indranil Chatterjee, since you deal with a large exchange and markets, to share some thoughts on what you see happening, on what's not just happening, but where you see this going in a very short amount of time. Yeah.
Thank you. Morning all. So we wanted to talk about the convergence between the power market and the carbon market per se. Now, power market, if some of us are exposed to power market, so power market has been there for a long time. Power market started with the enactment of Indian Electricity Act in 2003. The Indian Electricity Act very clearly spelled out 2-3 broad regulations in that regard. So they spoke about sort of non-discriminatory open access for distribution and transmission sector. The Electricity Act also spoke about delicensing the generation entities, and most importantly, it coined the term of trading. So that was the genesis of the market. Then it went through many rounds of iterations, reiterations, revisions, and presently where we are, that is an outcome of close to 20-21 years of working, consolidated working by not only the regulators, but all the participants, exchanges, and the entire stakeholder ecosystem for the power market. Now, power market is fairly established. So today the contracts are traded in power market. Contracts are traded from a duration of 90 minutes up to 3 months. Contracts are traded. Very soon we'll start trading contracts up to duration of 364 days. So all these things are happening. Now, if I compare this with the carbon market and the experience of carbon market and carbon as a commodity across the world. So carbon is a, as most of us are aware, so carbon is a very unstructured market, if I can use the term. So there are multiple countries running their own ETSs, which are different and they do not speak to each other as of now. Then we also have the voluntary carbon markets in place, and also carbon by nature of the market, it's a very micro level product. So electricity by source, whatever the source is, be it green, be it brown, be it nuclear, blue or something, it is one electron of electricity. But the way the carbon market has evolved here, the way we see is each project itself is a contract. Each project has a value of its own in the global market. So suppose somebody is putting up a mangrove forest in Sundarbans and somebody is putting up a hydro in Himachal. So these are two entirely different products with two entirely different kind of audiences and entirely different kind of price expectations. So these are the nuances that somehow has to be built when we talk about the compliance market or a pan-Indian CCTS market per se. Also, carbon market is unique in a way. There is a lot of role that is played by the participants. Participants mean the traders. Now, traders play a very large role. So I think the prices that Dinesh was showing, the volumes that Dinesh was showing, a lot of it was dependent on the traders. The traders hedge their position. They hold the carbon credits. Then when they say good prices, they sell those credits. There is also a lot of retrading. So recent study says in the carbon market, in the European ETS as well, the retrading is more than 2.4. So each credit that comes out of the system, it is traded 2.5 times before it gets burnt or redeemed. So do we allow traders to come in the system? What role will the traders be playing going ahead? Because they are all market makers collectively. See, creating a market is one thing, but then that market also has to be developed, grown, managed in a proper way. So the way the experiences we have and of the environmental markets, we have been running RECs and ESERTs since last 11, 12 years. And historically, it is seen that REC market only becomes hot when it is the end of the year. December, January, February, people start coming, playing because they will have to meet with the compliance. ESERT market, they started, ESERT price fell down to 200 rupees, trading stopped, then again a floor price was fixed. Now all these factors needs to be considered when we create a national market looking at the demand and supply of the product from both the perspectives. Then also I would like to touch upon I would not use the term confusion, but maybe there are so many independent efforts that are going in. So one side, of course, we have BEE coming out with CCTS, but there was also,
Sorry, with what?
we have Bureau of Energy Efficiency, who is coming out with the CCTS scheme, the Carbon Credit Trading Scheme, the Indian ETS scheme.
If we could not use as many acronyms because our audience is power sector is why
I'm sorry. So Bureau of Energy Efficiency is coming out with the Carbon Credit Trading Scheme. We also came across that Ministry of Agriculture is now coming out with their own carbon credit framework. Will that be a part of the CCTS scheme or will it be an independent scheme? It's not clear as of now. Ministry of Coal is coming out with their own carbon trade framework. And then also we see that the green credit program that is there. And again, so the target market is almost the same. So green trade largely targets forests, and forestry forms a large part of our carbon credit base as well. So there are multitude of efforts that are now being taken, which needs to be consolidated and sort of single-pointedly come so that the participants in the market, the buyers, sellers, and traders, and of course the exchanges, they became clear that what is the product that is to be traded, what is the contract duration, what could be the price of the product, Till the time all these ambiguities remain, it will be difficult to settle at a one or a constant market. But of course, understanding is with time, these things will become more and more clear. Yeah.
Thank you. This point about, I mean, multiple ministries doing things comes back to what Dinesh, you opened with, that we do have this sectoral differentiation. And so what I've understood is you're saying right now it's project centric as opposed to an exchange market and as tradable yet. So that is hopefully things that will evolve to a more fungible system. I want to just keep us on the power side because we have someone here from Greenko as well, and look forward to your remarks in just a minute. I just want to give a little context. We have today other instruments that are not exactly a carbon tax. India has a coal cess, as you may know, 400 rupees a ton. If you translate that into carbon, it's in the order of $3 a ton CO2-ish. And if you now translate that to the power sector, coal implication is in the order of 25 paise a kilowatt hour is what that translates to. So one thing that will hit you is if we have $25 a ton, $50 a ton, which are global compliance market prices, or aspirations for even worldwide prices to rise to, you can do the math and understand what the implication is for the power sector. It's non-trivial, to use the oversimplification term. And so we already tax in other mechanisms petrol and diesel. Excise and VAT is very large, and it's well documented how large it is. If you translate those amounts that are taxed today, they are in the order of $100 a ton CO2 or higher. So we already have taxations, and so figuring out coverage, figuring out harmonization is going to be as important as just the market design of your system. So with that, I would like to request Mr. Rambabu from Greenko, the CSO, Chief Sustainability Officer. Greenko, as many of you will know, is, well, you can explain both your hat and a little bit on, where you see this space. Thank you.
Yeah, I will also wear I co-chair the Climate Change Committee at FICCI. So from there, I will also bring in the overall industry perspective.
Industry, yes, please.
Yeah. One thing that I wanted to emphasize is that when you are talking about the carbon markets today versus when we were talking in the Kyoto Protocol, these two regimes are entirely different. To me, they are different essentially because in the Kyoto, there were we had an obligation, in some countries which did not have an obligation. The Paris framework is that everybody has an obligation. Of course, the common but differentiated responsibilities are still recognized, and they are recognized in the terms of the obligation. Okay?
Which were voluntarily set by the individual
countries. It is no longer that common but differentiated responsibilities means no responsibilities to some and responsibilities to some other, but this time it is a differentiated responsibilities meant that some have less and some have more voluntarily set. And they are also one not a very good thing that happened is that they are also not articulated in terms of one common unit. Okay, they are articulated in terms of varieties of units which are going to create complications as we go along the route. But another important thing that you need to notice that in the view of nearby net zero targets, the targets that we are talking in the shorter term and medium term, okay, they are such a way that the journey that you take should not lock you up, wherein you will not be able to achieve the net zero target. So the kind of projects that you would like to do, the carbon credits that you wanted to earn, etc., as a country, as a geography, is entirely different from the thought process that we had in the Kyoto regime. But unfortunately in the market, the Kyoto thinking, Kyoto process, Kyoto methods are still continuing, especially carried forward today, not from Kyoto, but by the voluntary markets. Because the voluntary markets became the more owners of the Kyoto than anybody else. Okay, they continue the same processes as. Another important thing that needed to be recognized is that the power is definitely different from the carbon, because power is a excludable commodity, carbon is a non-excludable commodity. It delivers a global value. It doesn't deliver a utility value to the guy who is paying for it. So it has its own complications, okay, while designing a carbon market versus the power markets. Coming to more specific things within India, I think what we have today is that on one side you have a domestic carbon market shaping up. On the other side, Government of India has already declared that what are the kinds of projects, 13 categories of projects that the Government of India would like to allow those credits to be transferred under Article 6.2, 6.4. So that is called, internationally transferred mitigation outcomes, which are those projects which can generate them. So we are already very clear, despite some confusion that keeps coming in again and again, that India is very clear. This is what I want to do to meet my NDC. This is what I want to do in addition, but that addition actually will be supported by the international funding, which is through ITMOS, right? A significant international funding through ITMOS.
Sorry, could you, for the audiences, help expand it more? Yeah.
Again, ITMOS are internationally transferred mitigation outcomes. That means in Paris Climate Agreement, you have a Article 6.2 and Article 6.4. I think Dinesh was explaining that when I came in. Article 6.2 is a mechanism in which a country Sweden can support India or an entity in India to do a project and take the emission reductions from India to the Sweden to meet its own obligations or go beyond those obligations, go beyond their NDCs. So really speaking, what is happening under Article 6.2 is that the multiple countries, okay, are actually supporting projects in other countries just as much that used to happen in the CDM days. But Government of India is very clear. That support, I don't want to start having plain vanilla renewables. That support, I don't want to do plain vanilla energy efficiency that I did in CDM days. Okay, what I want to do is that I want to do green hydrogen with that money. I want to do offshore wind energy with that money. I want to do solar thermal with that money. I want to do energy storage with that money. Carbon capture, utilization and storage with that money. Not that plain vanilla CDM kind of. That plain vanilla CDM kind of projects are part of the domestic carbon market, and all that we still need to do. We still need to establish wind power plants, solar power plants to achieve our NDCs, so that we achieve that 50% capacity of renewables in the whole overall thing. So to cut it short, this is an introductory remark, so I don't want to go further and further. So to cut it short, if at all you want to address the overall issue of integrating the power markets and the carbon markets, I see a clear, the energy markets, power markets, electricity markets, let us take that way. Electricity markets are absolutely important for early decarbonization of India. That is, I think, is becoming very, very clear. Electrification, and I will call it re-electrification. That is the electrify all the end users and decarbonize the electricity is going to become one of the important mantras of India's industrial decarbonization. That is, I think, is becoming very clear. Because of that, the electricity demand will outstrip all the forecasts that we have seen. Because when I say electrification and re-electrification would mean, for example, mobility, if it gets electrified, and then it gets re-electrified. So you will have a huge demand surge, okay, in the electrification. It will outstrip much of the, okay. Now the challenge, another point is that the electricity production generation cost in India, we almost have achieved sort of a parity. That means it's zero carbon electricity versus highly intensive carbon intensive electricity are almost costing similar numbers. There is a difference, but almost costing similar numbers. Okay, if I look at the total economic cost, they are actually not environmental cost, total economic cost, if I look into it, they're almost coming very similar. But only challenge is the storage, right?
And by that time, the costs are not similar.
Huh?
Once you add the storage, the costs are not
Absolutely,
similar.
absolutely. That's what I'm saying. So the challenge there is the storage. Okay, if I add the storage, and in India is again we will come back in the later discussion. India is has the best architecture in the world to actually bring down the storage costs. So we have the significant capacity of pumped storage that is already announced. One is by Greenko to begin with, but by multiple other agencies have come out with the pumped storage. And pumped storage brings down the cost of storage almost to half. And with the low-cost renewable electricity and low-cost pumped storage, we have capability to today give zero carbon power or CFE, carbon-free electricity, at a cost almost comparable to a new coal-based power plant, not old coal-based power plant. If somebody wants to establish a new coal-based power plant, at what price he can supply? Okay, the CFE, carbon-free electricity, combining RE, wind and solar plus PSP, can supply at the similar cost. So today we have a possibility, to me looks like, I just want to put a proposition on the table. In the power markets, on one side on the power markets, you should be able to sell power with carbon tag. That carbon tag could be the carbon intensity is 0.2 tons per megawatt hour. Carbon intensity is 0.4 tons per megawatt hour. Carbon intensity is 0.6 tons per megawatt.
For coal plants, it's higher.
No, I'm saying the distribution company will sell with the tag.
Okay.
Okay. If we sell with the tag, the important thing in the ICM, that Indian carbon market, is that when I do counting, I am an industry, I have an obligation. So if I am buying a power with a certain price, okay, with a 0.4 tag or a 0.2 tag or a 0.6 tag, I will account that. And not only that, another important thing for most of the industry that is happening today is that I want to harness the opportunity of exporting green commodities outside the country. Whether it is a green ammonia, whether it is a green hydrogen, whether it is a green steel. For that also, I have certain regulations to define. And the way I want to count the carbon intensity, right? So if the power markets come in, electricity markets come in, and integrate the electricity as a commodity plus carbon as a commodity, and start providing a decent carbon tag, I think that is one form of integration of the two markets at one place. And possibly the details can be thought about it, and the international experiences could be brought together. Some experiments have been tried. China is toying something similar to this idea. We can still discuss about it, and then we can, as we go forward, we can talk about it. Thank you.
Thank you. As people may know from the power side, we already have a huge time of day spread in power exchange prices. Middle of the day, where we have a modest solar compared to our ambition, it's half the price, like a 4 or 5 rupees spread per kilowatt hour compared to the evening prices. So clearly this more granular issue is going to be a key for the power sector side on how we deal with it, because the carbon market, of course, the time constants are much, much longer, the periods. If I could now turn to Snigdha for your opening remarks, both as an expert, but also with a CESL hat, sort of not only what are you doing and how it fits into the larger ecosystem, but where you see it going. Thank you.
Thanks, Rahul. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us in this discussion. I think I'm learning a lot as I'm also listening to the various conversations. And Mr. Babu, your presentation was very helpful in understanding how the voluntary markets, or as you're calling international markets, and the compliance markets are sort of, evolving alongside, and there are areas for synergy between the two, which would be great to, continue to explore. Like it was said at the start of the discussion, carbon credits are a mere instrument towards achieving carbon reduction and looking at the broader goal of working towards climate change management and mitigation. So coming to the role that CSL, which is a subsidiary of ESL, known for their energy efficiency programs, what we have done is that all of our programs across public mobility and energy efficiency, LED bulb distribution, are registered or are in the process of being registered with international carbon markets. So we have programs in EV charging, the public charging infrastructure that is registered with an international carbon market. We are working in coordination with state transport undertakings to build a project for registration of our public electric buses, again in the international markets. And we have, in fact, received our first set of credit issuance for our rural LED bulb distribution program. So this is a business model. As a business model, we have ensured that carbon credits are a source of financing across our projects, because most of them, as you can imagine, especially in public e-mobility, are subsidized through the FAME scheme and other avenues. So carbon credits is a way we are exploring to reduce the dependency on subsidies and to have a model that in future could probably be self-sustainable. And as it was already discussed in Mr. Babu and earlier Mr. Tongia's discussion as well, that the carbon markets are relatively non-transparent, we are not sure how far it goes before the credits are retired. So those are elements that we are also experiencing. What we at CSL are learning is that we are going to other PSUs, like Delhi Metro has a very established carbon credit unit. So we are learning from them on how they have successfully registered their projects and monetized their credits. We're learning from NHPC, another major PSU, West Bengal State Electricity Department, another public utility that recently came up with a carbon credit, selling off their carbon credit. So we are learning from others, and we are also exploring ways to monetize it through a public tender. In fact, we've just come out with a tender for our LED program. And also at the same time learning from the domestic carbon market, how those are evolving. And in fact, that question that you, sir, raised about how the projects, even within the PSUs and government that are already registered in international carbon markets, including CSLs, how will they be included or recognized by the domestic carbon market? So that is a question we are also waiting for an answer, but it sounds from today's discussion that we will probably have some way out of the situation. So I think that's what I would start with, and happy to share further.
Thank you. We'll come to the next round. If I could now turn to Ashok, if you could share your opening thoughts, obviously on quality, but on other aspects as well.
So thank you, Rahul. And after listening many speakers, I do understand that renewable energy especially play a very important role for decarbonization of a nation or the organization. So I have a small presentation. So I need to explain how we are thinking about the carbon market.
So while he's loading, you could start something.
Yeah. So I am from the organization called Verma.
Sorry.
So
would you prefer to be here or stay with the
no,
clicker?
no, it's okay. I think
So
it's
you
okay.
can use the clicker.
Yeah. So I am from the organization called Verma. So Verma is a standard setting organization. We are a non-profit organization based in Washington DC, but we are working from all over the world. And we are a mission-driven organization. We are into designing, developing, and managing the standards for carbon that allow investors to invest in the project that are removing or avoiding the GHG emissions or improving the livelihoods and protect the environment. So we, through our standards, are helping organizations, public or private, to achieve their decarbonization targets. So in the left-hand side, these are the list of the standards we are developing and maintaining. So first, our most widely worldwide standard is the verified carbon standards. So these standards allow project developers to develop the project for greenhouse gas emission reductions activities. Whereas the jurisdictional and nested RED plus standard or the framework is allowing governments to develop the project for forest conservation, for getting the carbon finance. And since we are also talking about the price, so climate community and biodiversity standard and the sustainable development verified impact standards, these are the two standards that allow project developer to get a better price in the market, because if they are getting certified their project under these two standards, they will show that their project is meeting the requirement of the environmental, social and the millennium sustainable development goals. And we are also maintaining the plastic waste reduction standards, which allow project developer to develop two kind of the credits. First, waste collection credit, and second is the waste recycling credits. Next, please. Oh, sorry. So far, we have issued more than 1.2 billion plus ton of GHG emission reductions by registering 2,100 plus project from the 95 countries. So this is the detail of the projects we have registered and in the pipeline from India. So out of 2,100 plus projects, 640 projects have been registered from India, and we are more than 350 projects in pipeline from India, and around 115 projects what we have in the pipeline from the FOLU sector, which include the ARR, ALM, WRC and RED plus activities, and around 235 projects from the non-FLU projects.
So if you could just clarify for the audience, agriculture, yeah, the full form, yeah, of AFLO.
Oh, FOLU means the agriculture, forest and other land use activities. So nowadays we are getting lot of project for nature-based solutions for the regenerative agriculture activities. So FOLU stands for this.
And there, of course, you get a small issue of time constants, because the benefits are over time, while credits are historically, how do you front load them or how do you make them equivalent has been a global challenge, because a tree will put in carbon till it matures faster rate than once it's stabilized. So these are all sorts of difficulties, why there is both a segregation and a sort of international volatility towards this.
So, so far we have a 16 sectoral scope where a project developer can develop the project and can develop the methodology also. So, and last year we have published the sectoral scope for carbon capture and storage, and we have published our methodology also last year for public consultation. And this year on 1st March, we have also published consultation process for tool and the module for the carbon capture and storage methodology. So since I am working with the regional engagement team of Vera, so what we are doing under the regional engagement, we are helping or supporting the governments or the subnational governments to build a competency or the capacity to their staff by conducting through webinars, workshops, seminar and the events on our on the key topic of our standards, methodology requirements and how Vera registry is functioning. So far for under the regional engagement, we need to have an agreement or the MOU with the national government, development bank and the research organizations.
Sorry, just one second. If we could just get the mic a little bit lower, I think it's echoing. Is the quality good or it's echoing? Just a hint if they could, yeah, sorry.
Yeah. So Vera is only having agreement or the memorandum of understanding with the national or the subnational governments. We can also have a MOU with the development banks and the research organizations. So far we already have a MOU with South Korea, Singapore, Pakistan, Vietnam, Philippines, Thailand and Bolivia, and we also have a MOU with the CAIX, which is a public bank in Brazil, and Robobank also. So under this MOUs, we are providing a capacity building program to them. So like we cannot have a MOU with the organization who are involved into the project development to avoid the conflict of interest. So VCS program, like the voluntary carbon market program, is also accepted by many countries for their domestic compliance market, like Colombia, South Africa, Singapore, and Chile. And our program also accepted by the Corsia, and we are working towards for with many government to adopt our program. And our program is also endorsed by International Carbon Reduction and Offset Alliance. So thank you. So I will be looking forward to provide you more in-depth information about how we are supporting the governments. Thank you.
Sorry, I was just checking my notes and timekeeping, since we're not quite finished with the opening remarks, but we've had good discussion, so that is the counter to this. And what we will do is mix it up for the next session instead of going one by one necessarily. If I could now ask Rohit Kumar to share your thoughts, since you, of course, are Carbon Markets Association of India, if you could bring both an industry perspective as well as sort of, if it's appropriate, some global learnings and implications. You have a presentation? Yeah. Great.
Thank you.
Guys,
Thank you very much.
don't worry. This is a $1 trillion market we're talking about, so it takes a little time.
So great. Thank you very much for inviting me in this program. So I will just brief you about the Carbon Market Association of India. So we are a Section 8 company, and we work dedicatedly for net zero transition to India and carbon neutrality target. Also, we are a knowledge partner for Ministry of Railway, State Water and Sanitation Missions, and Ministry of Jal Shakti for developing carbon projects, and also helping them to identify what are the sustainable projects are available in this sector, so that all these organizations can achieve net zero transition on the limited timeline they have decided. We are a member for Carbon Capture Utilization Committee and Green Hydrogen Committee at NITI, and we are closely working with some of the pilot projects with NITI in ONGC refinery and at Gujarat. We are technical committee member for Green Credit Program launched by our Honorable Prime Minister in COP28, and we are one of the member and helping government for developing some of the methodology in this sector. And CMI has been also selected and served Bureau of Energy and other standard, where we are giving the feedback about the representation about the industry feedbacks and policy level suggestions and recommendations. And we have been also selected for Bureau of Indian Standards Subcommittee for Greenhouse Gas and Climate Change Program. Recently, we have sent multiple MU signed, starting from VCMI, World Energy Council, and Service Export Promotion Councils and areas, MNRE, etc. So when we discuss about the carbon market or decarbonization, I think this is the slide where we'd like to focus more initially, that as an industry, how we can achieve the net zero goal and decarbonization. So there is a ladder to achieve the net zero goal. So CMAI is really focusing on this area. First of all, we have inventorying GHG mitigation, GHG activity data, digitization of emission data and sources, then identifying the top emission sources of the organization and industries, then define net zero target and decarbonization roadmap, and also net zero roadmap and track emission reduction possibilities and measurement tools. Then finally, organization becomes the net zero goal and achieve the net zero transition. Apart from that, most of the industry has completely focusing on climate risk and impact baselining right now. And as our lot of members has already achieved the already decided the net zero goal target, then they really focus on net zero strategy and development. Then organization transformations, as they are already working on this direction. And then the transparency and the reporting. So that is the area where CMAI is really focusing and working and helping industry to achieve this net zero goal.
If we could also help the audience, how many of you have heard the term scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3? How many have not? Let's work backwards. It's okay to say, okay. So there are several. So this is an important point. It relates to this one, because who is emitting? SEBI has a norm that all big companies, 2000, top 2000, I think, have to start declaring. It's not ESG, it's a compliance requirement. Now, the catch is scope 1 emissions are those emissions that you do as an entity, yourself, your factory. Scope 2 adds electricity that you consume and its source. Because electricity, some people generate as themselves captive power, but the bulk of electricity is just bought as a factory. Aluminum, for example, can be. So that's relatively easy. Scope 3 is now the real trick, because that now looks at the life cycle, the chain. So imagine you're saying, I'm using biomass. Biomass is carbon neutral-ish. Now, what about that fertilizer? What about the truck that carried the biomass to your thing? Scope 3 is the hardest. And so this is also something, so when you say industries need help to do this, my guess would be that right now it is scope 1 and scope 2 focused.
And scope 3, so our member has already developed a tool called measurement of scope 1 and 2 and 3 also. And that tool we have also supplying to some of the government organizations.
So the question is always on the quality, because by the time you get to scope 3, we talked to a major industry. They said, I have 180 major vendors and partners that I deal with. Forget the thousands of smaller vendors, and each of these vendors has another couple of hundred sub. Okay. So anytime somebody says we've got it done, please be a little bit cautious.
So Rahul rightly said that as a country we have a large MSME. So entire value chain decarbonization is a very primary task for India. So I have certain recommendations I will share in the next slide. And so this is really important, as all of us discuss about how many carbon market opportunity India has. So I will start from the voluntary carbon market. As India is expected to grow, as globally they're expected to grow around $10 billion by 2030. And India has 30% share right now. So there's a great opportunity for country to get FDI in this sector. Recently, Indian government has also requested developing nation or to give $1 trillion to developed nation to give $1 trillion to developing nation every year from 2025 to 2035. So we need enough fund right now. So we are requesting Ministry of Power and Bureau of Energy to develop a guideline and nurture voluntary market aggressively in this country so that large FDI can come. Apart from that, we know about the Article 6 Paris Agreement. We have discussed about that. And Article 6 is going to play a very important role, but unfortunately Article 6 is 6.2 and 6.4 is not active. So I think we have to wait for Azerbaijan COP, where all this rule and regulation will be finalized. But we are very happy that Indian carbon market is going to launch and is going to meet NDC goal and to meet various purpose. Apart from that, we also have a CORSIA, and we have discussed about the CORSIA where India has signed or yet to sign. 126 countries has already participated in the CORSIA, and that is really going to help aviation sector to reduce the emission in coming days. So we discussed about the carbon credit. So I want to discuss about what are the credit opportunities there, where carbon credit is one of the opportunity as a country we have. So we have various opportunity as a country, and we can play a very important role for decarbonization by various activities, starting from Article 6.2 Paris Agreement, which is going to be finalized, and that is going to play a very important role in India, because we are going to sign MOUs with various countries like Japan, Korea, Singapore, and US, and other part of the world. Then Article 6.4 is in the Paris Agreement, international compliance carbon market will get enabled in the COP, next COP, and all the rule regulation, I'm sure that will be finalized. And then we have a domestic carbon market we already launched as a compliance market as well as voluntary carbon market. We have Green Trade program launched by Government of India that is really encouraging, but different than carbon market because it is not completely focused on GHG mitigation program, but it is really focused on SDG goals and parameters. Then we have international renewable certificates, we already know that. We have national renewable certificates, we have PAT right now, which is going to migrate to carbon market of India in coming years. And we have CORSIA aligned international certificates. We have plastic credit national market, plastic credit international market, and lastly the voluntary carbon market. So we really come out and club all these opportunities. So we have much, much more beyond carbon. We can think and work on this direction and be incentivized to companies and corporates. But these are 4 areas where we are really focusing on Article 6.2 because we are expecting more than $10 billion will come to India in 10 years. By 13 technology sectors, I will discuss about those technology sectors. And all these technology sectors is going to help grid and power sector in the big way in the country to modernize the entire power sector in the coming years. And we have Article 6.4, so the sectors Government of India is yet to decide. I'm sure that it will be very clear in coming year. Then we have national carbon market, which is definitely going to help India to meet NDC goal. We have already decided. And we are really enthusiastic that Government of India is coming with national carbon market and focusing on how India can achieve the net zero transition. Now finally, the voluntary carbon market is voluntary carbon actions, voluntary action for environment and climate change protection. And I'm sure that a lot of Indian industry is already working in this direction. And India has 30% share in the voluntary carbon market and the global leadership in this domain. I'm sure that we'll be able to maintain and fetch a lot of FDI to the country. But this is a very important slide I have to discuss that globally we are not in the one forum and in the COP28, we have seen that Article 6.2 is not agreed, and Article 6.4 is not agreed finally in the overall. But I think that it is going to be more and more clarity in the coming COP. But 6.8 we have agreed. So what are the opportunities right now as a country we have? Since we have already leader in voluntary carbon market, we can actually really focus on about voluntary carbon market gradually to recognize other countries of ITMO transfer can be done in this mechanism. And all the independent market regulator coming together, because we also send a lot of voluntary carbon market quality and standard parameters and question mark globally. So recently we have also signed MU with BCMI for Indian carbon credit and standard quality and promoting it to globally so that India can get a right price of carbon credit and FDI. These are 13 technology area. I think Rambabu has already discussed about some of them. So most of the technology area is really focusing about the energy side. So that is going to help India to accelerate the momentum for decarbonization, starting from renewable energy with storage, solar thermal power, offshore wind, green hydrogen, compressed biogas. Prime Minister has already announced in the India Energy Week that we are expecting 5,000 CBG plants in coming years to the country. And emerging mobility solutions and high-end technology, energy efficiency, sustainable aviation fuel, best available technology for process improvement on the hard-to-abate sector, tidal energy, high voltage direct current transformation, green ammonia, and CCUS. So I'm sure that India can again take a big lead in this direction and get many more FDI. I think more than 10 to $15 billion they are expecting that India is going to get in this sector in coming years. And we already discussed that there are multiple carbon projects opportunity as a country we have. Renewable energy, energy efficiency, household and community-based projects, which is getting good carbon price, waste disposal projects, transportation, agriculture, forestry, land use, blue carbon. Everywhere India is working dedicatedly right now. And all this activity is going to fetch good amount and good revenue to the country and help accelerate the momentum for decarbonization. So I've done a small case study. Yeah, sorry.
Okay, since we are behind schedule,
Yeah,
if you could,
yeah.
yes.
I'll just take 2-3 more minutes. Yeah.
1 or 2.
Yeah. So recently we have done a solar pump project, and what we are trying to discuss here that how as a country we can play a very important role to aggregation of the project right now. This is the most important task. So before the carbon credit generation, the aggregation is the biggest task as a country we have to play a very important role, where CMA is dedicatedly working. And Ministry of Jal Shakti, we have developing a project. We have become a knowledge partner, where Uttar Pradesh as a state, where 33,000 solar pump installation is going to bear, and they are replacing the diesel pump there. So we have done a case study, and where 25 carbon credit can be generated, because this project is viable because of additionality is there. 45% central government is funding, 45% state government, and 10% community is funding. So this project CMI is handling right now. I am sure that it will give enough money for the village level and community level for helping this transition. Similarly, we have done the compressed biogas projects, where 3 years is a break-even for all these kind of projects, and CMI is directly pushing and working with the members for developing such projects in India. These are some of the recommendations and takeaway I'd like to share. That India has requires investment of $10 trillion. So voluntary market can play a very important role right now to get the funding. Green credit program again can play an important role. But unfortunately, initial fund is required for green credit program. We have requested government to add all those parameters so the corporate can participate in the stage 1. Carbon taxation, we have very less clarity as a country. We are not sure that carbon credit comes on the goods and service. We have given representation to Ministry of Finance and also Ministry of Commerce and Industry. And we also requesting to give carbon as an export incentive to this sector so that we can get FDI smoothly in this country. And apart from that, we have requested for adding nature-based solution and clean cooking initiatives in Article 6.2, because there are only 13 technologies are there. We are a different kind of country altogether. We have large community, and community has to play a very important role for decarbonization. Only the industry cannot do anything. Apart from that, we also like to discuss in the forum that knowledge sharing and capacity building is the biggest area where India needs to be focused right now, because industry has to groom properly for get this transition. So we are working closely for the carbon credit integrity part. We have recently done a program with VCMAI. Now we are coming with a report where how Indian carbon credit quality and standard can be improved so that country can get large number of carbon credit value and pricing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We'll come back for audience in a bit, but that also means we should be as short and sharp in our discussion. I don't know about you, but I've certainly learned a lot on where we are and some of the details. And 2 questions we'll just go through before opening it up as discussions, and they're not necessarily directed at anyone in particular. Here we're talking about, for example, a carbon credit, a sellable asset, something to be traded if it's a market mechanism. From a power perspective to this, or even industry, is it fair to simplify this thinking that saying these credits should be equal to a viability gap funding? Because coming back to that additivity requirement, if you put up a solar panel, it's not really additive. Now, if you go get credit for it, good, enjoy that money, free money when you can. But quite frankly, it shouldn't continue. But because that's business as usual. But there is a lot more being done. We are pushing the envelope. You talked about the trillions of dollars we will need to be investing. Not all of that is market viable today. If you look at IPCC's AR6, there's a very nice graph, SPM7, which shows cost compared to the business as usual and how much you can mitigate. That's equivalent to the marginal abatement cost curves, the MAC curves that were famous from McKinsey. Wind and solar is already in their colors blue, which means it's cheaper than the alternative. It doesn't cost you more to put up wind and solar, but that only goes so far from the power sector. Then you get the storage issue requirement. So is that a fair simplification that, look, anything beyond what the market can do easily, we need some help? Now, obviously, Government of India shouldn't be subsidizing this. It shouldn't necessarily entirely be passed through to the consumers. So is this sort of a mechanism one way to think about? And if that's the case, then where do we see prices looking like? Because ultimately, it's not only dollar per ton CO2, we should be translating that into rupees per kilowatt hour, dollar per ton steel or ammonia, etc. So can you help us sort of think this through? Are there more mics, please? Can we get, how many? We have only, one or two more mics, yeah. So it's open, please jump in.
Yeah. I think what you were saying is that the carbon price and its implications to the commodity price.
That's part of it, but also that's one half. The other is just that if there is a carbon price and someone internationally is trading or funding it, so I mean the government always asks how much FDI did I get? Well, how much inflow did I get through the carbon market? A, not the amount, but how does it get used? Can we think of it that it should be, is that the right framing? It should be used to pay for that which would not have happened otherwise.
Okay. I'll just take you through the various environmental markets that evolved very briefly. The Montreal has adopted the same principle as you are saying. What is the viability gap funding? And I will fund you exactly the same for the emission reductions that you are doing. Then I will calculate for each reduction, the ozone depleting substances reduction, at what cost are you doing, and I will stack them up, and I will start funding from the bottom up. Okay, so that is the Montreal Protocol. Then there is a Kyoto Protocol which said that if you have to generate something called certified emission reductions, you should not be business as usual. That's it. How much viability gap you have, I have no business. Hence you had HFC projects which had a viability gap of this much and earned at least 1,000 times that viability gap through carbon credits, right? So I think this whole viability gap funding additionality, I think is, I was, in the beginning I said hangover from Kyoto Protocol. So that is the argument still going on, this additionality and all. This hangover is continuing. Today you have a Paris Climate Agreement which is very clear. Under Article 6.2, we are very clear that we require funding and they promise net zero by 2050 and their 2030 targets are much deeper. Our 2030 targets are not as deeper and we can do it by net zero by 2070. Hence, there is a possibility of doing certain action here today and transfer it to them and get the investment so that we are ready for 2070 net zero. So that is the 13 categories that the Government of India, in fact, there was a thought process in Government of India. They would approve these projects only if viability gap is found to be crossing a certain carbon price. In fact, they were toying with a number called $40, $50. They may even require you to give an undertaking that you will not sell anything more or above, lower, etc. etc. They want to keep a tag on that, so it's not getting undersold in the international market. Now coming to your specific question of how the carbon for example, if I go to the green hydrogen, today I see the Indian architecture is the best placed in the world. Indians' electricity architecture and the hydrogen architecture with alkalizers.
So Rambabu, I will hold off this question because I think it's well understood how to translate and where. But these first points that you've raised, I think, are very, very key, because that is exactly the concern that people have had, that we shouldn't do it. So are we learning from the past?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Indranil.
Just wanted to touch upon on this on the pricing aspect. Now today in the Indian market again, so we have two attributes, environmental attributes. One is REC, one is ISUW. Third environmental attribute is carbon, that is yet to come. REC is 1 MWh of electricity.
Sorry, renewable energy
Renewable
certificate.
energy certificates,
Sorry,
yeah.
we want to be acronym free.
So renewable energy certificates are equivalent to 1 MWh. That is today's rate is 300 rupees one certificate. The earlier they had a floor of 1,000 fell to 800, 700, 600. Now it is 300, 280 is the per certificate cost. ECert is energy saving certificates. It's an outcome of the perform, achieve and trade PAT mechanism. ECerts have been given a floor of 1840 rupees in the Indian market. Now, when we talk about carbon credit or the offsets of the CCTS, the carbon credit trading scheme, so there was some elementary calculation that were being done, and in that calculation it was seen that ECert's unit is 1 MTOE, metric ton of oil equivalent, REC is MWH, carbon is tons of CO2. Now, there was some interplay fungibility that were done, and I think one ECert was close to 2.5 or 2.6 carbon credit certificates. So that was the calculation that was coming. So now if we do a back calculation from 1840 a piece of ECert, so one piece of carbon credit that the CCTS, the government approved carbon credit, would be costing close to 500 to 600 rupees in the market. That is 5 to 6 euro. Now, 5 to 6 euro is Indian ETS price, wherein we have the EU ETS price at 70 euro. Now, this is the gap. This 50, 60 euro is the gap which we are expected to, or we are trying to get through these 13 sectors, which has been identified and which will be allowed to export, and they will come as a VGF funding to the sector. So from a pricing perspective, I think our prices would remain at a lower rate, and this entire gap of 50, 60 euro, do we expect to get that, or it is 10 euro, 15 euro, 20 euro that the market would discover going ahead?
TBD.
So I just wanted to mention, because you talked about viability gap funding, and I thought I would talk about a program, the Gram Ujala scheme, where we are using the carbon credits to sort of bring down. So let me go back to the Ujala scheme of ESL, which did significantly bring down the pricing for the LED bulbs and sort of establish the market in the country. But then our surveys showed that the penetration of LED bulbs in rural areas continues to be significantly lower. And over there, we are still seeing a higher demand for ICLs, for the simple reason that the per unit price of
Incandescent, please, less acronyms.
Sorry, incandescent light bulbs. So the I'm thinking if I know the full form of LED bulbs.
That one's okay. We all know what LED is.
It's like diode bulb.
Yeah.
So that is still prohibitive at 70, 80 rupees. And so what we've done in so we've launched a new scheme called the Gram Ujala scheme, where we are distributing LED bulbs in pilot areas at about 10 to 12 rupees, and the difference of the net difference between the 70 rupees and 10 to 12 rupees, we are bringing in through carbon credits. So that way, in terms of to prove the viability of this project on the ground and passing on the benefits of the carbon credits to the final end user in a rural market, which has a very significant number of women beneficiaries as well. So we're trying to do that, trying to touch the SDGs through this project, and depending on the success of this pilot in the 5 states where we've distributed 1 crore bulbs, we are hopefully looking at expanding it beyond that.
Thank you. Last sort of question I'll just put out before we open it up. I know we started a little late, so that's the only extra time I would request your patience for. It seems that a lot of where we end up depends on how we start. And by that, what I mean is the allowances that are given to either by grandfathering, that's how the EU system started, or it was based on your intensity or achievement and output last year, which is then your 90%, for example. So can anyone just talk about how they see that happening for India? Because it's always a balancing act. If you give away too much for free, then obviously nothing really changes. But if you start too tight, then it is a burden. I mean, if you really just say that we give very little and we now have everything to be priced out, then at reasonable, quote unquote, carbon pricing, it's a big burden for the consumers. Any thoughts toward that?
Before taking up this question, only one thing that I wanted to say is that in the European Union emission trading system, allowances were given. Okay, in our trading system, possibly we will do a cap and trade. So cap is different from allowances. Allowances improves the liquidity in the market in a very, very big way, but the caps do not have that kind of an impact. But question is that how do we set the caps? So one good thing in Paris Climate Agreement that happened is that as much as it happened to the EU when they set their allowances, is that we have the NDC with us. From FICCI, we are going to represent to the possibly talking to the government saying that we as an industry will do 10% more than what the country has committed. That means if the country has committed for 40%, 45% intensity reduction, we will do 55%. If I have that 55% number with me, then possibly the caps can be decided. But then caps is that, how do I distribute it along? You know, which sector, how much?
And so within sector, it's
within
not just
sector,
because
within
there's
sector.
a lot of heterogeneity.
All right. So generally the thought process there is the capability. What is the capability that has, and what is the history that particular entity has. So these are the two factors. I think one good thing about India is that at least in PAT, we had some experience. Institutionally, that experience proved a big failure because PAT credits were generated in excess, right? So the targets were not set correctly. But the overall thing is that, but at least the process is very clear to us. So I think
so that's why I come back to how you set it up is going to be key, which we learned from the PAT scheme. Was there any quick? In that case, we had time for just very brief question from the audience. Do you need a mic from us? Or we can give you this.
Yeah. Okay. So my question is, how is the credit socialized in the supply chain? So for example,
So my question is, how are the credits socialized in the supply chain? So for example, say cement industry changes some input mix and they reduce carbon. Do they get the credit, or a developer which uses their cement, they claim the credit, or the end user who's kind of aware and buys a house, they get the credit, right? That is one question. And very quick second question is, what % of the finance, say in the solar pump thing, is met by credit? Like, is it 5%, 10%, just a ballpark figure?
So since 2 questions were already asked, then in the interest of time, we will need to, but people will be around and there is a next session and a discussion. These are open to anyone. Yeah.
I have one more question to add. So where are the IEX being placed in this particular ecosystem? The international renewable energy certificates, we are hearing a lot of traction is getting generated around them. So where are these getting placed in the entire carbon ecosystem?
Okay.
anybody else wants
Yeah.
to
Or there were, I think, someone else. Yeah. Please.
So I will touch the solar pump project regarding, you said that how much percentage. So it varies around project to project, it varies around 5 to 8% of the carbon credit revenue. And that is very important because community is investing 10% in this project. So I think that is going to help the community to mobilize this for 21 years because we are thinking for 7 into 3, 21 years. And overall, the state government is going to get more than 500 crore from this kind of projects. So we have done the back calculation and we have submitted to the government. Yeah.
I might talk about the IREC thing that you said. So if you're following the market, you will see that IREC is complementing carbon. In last 2-3 years, the carbon prices plummeted because of the issues around and discussions around so many things, integrity, transparency. And that is the time when the IREC traction has started and IREC has taken off. So IREC traditionally, I think they're doing the things correctly from the beginning itself. So they have clearly set aside rules for double accounting. They have clearly set aside rules for transparency. So it is a robust commodity, and they are restricting themselves to renewable. And that is the most maligned part of the carbon credit institution today. So these are complementary mechanisms, and IREX will continue to exist in the system. That's my take.
Let's be very brief about your first question, which was around
Bring it
ownership.
closer. Yeah.
So, I mean, ownership, at times it's defined in the methodology that who's going to own the credits. But I think there is a lot of, there are different models that we've seen in the market as well. For example, previously, the electricity development agencies used to have it in their tariff computation that there will be a certain percentage of credits that are generated by the developer will have to be shared with the agency. So similarly, we are seeing, in biofuels, for example, it's very clearly mentioned in the methodology that the biofuel producer is going to get the credits. So, so there are different models there. There is no one way in which you can look at whether the cement industry, which is taking certain actions to reduce their carbon emission, gets the credit for it, or it is ultimately the user who's buying, a low carbon cement should claim for it. So, I mean, it's not clear one way to approach this. There have been different models that have been explored. So, I hope that answers that question.
I mean, in fact, to close on a note, bringing it back to the power sector, there are now green tariffs being talked about for the end user perspective. And that's a fundamental question, because they should just be buying the green, but then is it really additive or is it a zero-sum game? Because there's a pool, unless it was a incrementally new dedicated RE output, then yes, you are a green user. So there is a lot of signaling that's virtue signaling, as opposed to moving the needle. This is part of the things that we're working on. Space is so large that it'll take a little bit of all of the above. It'll take some learning, and it'll also take for us to put our feet on the accelerator, because even though 2070 sounds like a long time away, there are steps that we have to be taking immediately. And I think other than what I've learned, what I am aware is that there is a next session. So hopefully we've left you with enough more questions in your mind that we can continue these conversations later on. I want to thank our panelists, thank ISGF for bringing us together, and look forward to now joining the audience for the next panel. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you everyone for the insightful presentations and valuable contributions on carbon markets. Now I would request Mr. Rajan sir to join us on the dais to hand over the token of appreciation to all our speakers. Starting with Mr. Dr. Rahul Tongia, Senior Fellow CSEP. Mr. Nithyanandam Yuvaraj Dinesh Babu, Executive Director, Climate Action Data Cluster.